The desert night was colder than the day had promised. A bitter wind carried dust over the plain, lifting it into ghostly spirals that caught the last of the dying firelight. The cowboy, Eli Morgan, shifted in his saddle, his eyes fixed on the broken figure slumped across his horse's back. The man was bleeding badly, his shirt torn wide open, chest painted with crimson that glistened in the moonlight. Eli didn't know his name, didn't know his story, but the weight of the stranger's body pressed against him like the burden of a promise. Out here, on the edge of nowhere, carrying another man's life meant carrying his fate too. He had found him an hour before, half dead on the trail, crawling through dust with a bullet lodged deep in his side. The man hadn't begged for help. He hadn't even spoken. Just looked at Eli with eyes clouded by pain but burning with something raw, desperate, and unyielding. It was enough. Eli wasn't the kind of man to leave another soul to die under the open sky, no matter what sins might have brought him there. The town of Ash Hollow lay 15 miles ahead, its lanterns hidden behind the curve of the hills. Eli pushed his horse harder, whispering to it through clenched teeth, steadying the sway of the dying man. Every jolt of the saddle drew a sharp groan from his companion, but Eli kept moving. If he stopped now, he knew the man would bleed out before dawn. The land around him was empty, but Eli felt the weight of unseen eyes. He couldn't shake the sense that he wasn't alone, that shadows trailed him, riding the ridgelines, waiting. More than once, he thought he caught movement against the starlight. The ripple of figures too still to be rocks, too patient to be animals. He told himself it was nerves, but the hand hovering near his revolver said otherwise. When he reached the river crossing, he dismounted and dragged the wounded man down into the shallow water. Eli pressed rags against the wound, trying to slow the bleeding. The man stirred then, whispering words Eli barely caught. "Don't let them take me back." The cowboy leaned close. "Who's after you?" But the man's eyes rolled back, his body convulsing with pain, and he slipped into unconsciousness. Eli cursed under his breath, hauling him back into the saddle. Whoever they were, Eli figured they were closer than he liked. By the time the first lights of Ash Hollow flickered in the distance, Eli's arms were numb from keeping the stranger balanced. The saloon lanterns burned low, and the sheriff's office was dark, but a few lamps glowed in the boarding houses and barns. Eli headed for the doctor's shack at the edge of town, a squat building with peeling paint and a crooked sign. Dr. Hawthorne answered the knock with bleary eyes and a whiskey glass still in his hand. When he saw the blood, the glass hit the floor. Together they carried the man inside, laying him on the rough wooden table. The doctor muttered curses as he peeled back the ruined shirt. "This ain't no ordinary gunfight wound," he said grimly. "This was meant to kill slow, hollow point, close range. Whoever shot him wanted him to suffer." Eli stood by the door, every sense on edge. He didn't like being boxed in, not tonight. He kept glancing through the window, searching the darkness for movement. The doctor's hands worked quickly, cutting, stitching, pouring liquor into the wound. The man groaned, but did not wake. Finally, with sweat pouring down his forehead, Hawthorne wrapped the wound in fresh bandages and stepped back. "He'll live the night, maybe," the doctor muttered. "But only if the devil himself doesn't come knocking." Eli nodded, but his jaw tightened. The devil was already here, he could feel it. And then, as if summoned by thought, the sound came. The soft thunder of hooves rolling over the dirt street outside. Slow, deliberate, not a drunkard's wander, not a rancher's passing ride. A company of riders was surrounding the town, their silhouettes sharp against the rising moon. Eli's hand went to his gun, but he didn't draw. Not yet. He stepped outside, eyes narrowing as the riders came into focus. Dozens of them, then hundreds, until the entire horizon was lined with warriors mounted on painted horses, their faces marked with war paint that gleamed in the silver light. Bows and rifles caught the glow, and their silence was heavier than any battle cry. The townsfolk were emerging now, fearful faces peeking from windows, doors creaking open. Murmurs ran through the street like a current of dread. The riders did not advance, but they did not leave. They simply waited, their presence undeniable, like storm clouds gathering on the edge of the world. Eli felt the weight of it then. This wasn't a posse. This wasn't a band of outlaws. This was an army. And for reasons he did not yet understand, they were here because of the half-dead man bleeding in the doctor's shack. Inside, the wounded man stirred again, his lips moving as if in prayer. Eli leaned close, straining to hear. "They came for me," the man rasped. "But not to kill. Not yet. I betrayed them. Now they'll guard me. Until the end." Before Eli could ask what he meant, the church bell rang out once, sharp and sudden. The sound cut through the night, and the warriors answered not with violence, but with silence so deep it hollowed the air. And in that silence, Eli Morgan understood something that chilled him more than death itself. He hadn't just carried a wounded man into town. He had carried war. The bell's echo faded, swallowed by the night. The townsfolk froze where they stood, caught between terror and awe. Not a single warrior moved, yet their stillness was a message louder than thunder. The town was no longer its own. Eli lingered at the doorway of the doctor's shack, one hand on the frame, the other hovering near his Colt. His mind ticked through every fight he'd ever been in, every ambush, every wrong turn in the desert. Nothing came close to this. He wasn't staring at raiders or outlaws, he was staring at a wall of living vengeance, patient enough to wait until dawn to strike if they wished. Behind him, the wounded man groaned. Dr. Hawthorne cursed under his breath, trying to keep him still, but the stranger fought the stitches like his own body was rejecting salvation. Eli turned back inside, his boots heavy on the floorboards. "You need to keep him down," Hawthorne said, sweat dripping down his temple. "If he tears this wound open again, I don't care if there's 1,000 men out there, he'll be dead before morning." The stranger's eyes cracked open then, fever bright and filled with a wild intensity. He grabbed Eli's wrist with surprising strength, his fingers like claws digging into flesh. "You shouldn't have brought me here," he rasped, his voice low but urgent. "They'll burn this town for me. 400 warriors sworn to their oaths. I broke them. I broke everything." "Who are they?" Eli demanded. The man coughed, spattering blood on his lips. "Not enemies, not anymore. They were my brothers once. My oath bound me to them, and when I broke it, I didn't just betray men, I betrayed the spirits themselves. They can't kill me outright, not yet. They must guard me, until I face what I ran from." Eli tried to pull free, but the man's grip tightened. "You don't understand. You carried me here. Now you're bound too." The cowboy's jaw clenched. He had no taste for riddles, not when the weight of 100 rifles sat outside in the dark. Still, he couldn't ignore the way the stranger's words sank into him like hooks in the skin. Bound, oath, guardianship. Hawthorne wiped his bloody hands on a rag, muttering, "If he keeps thrashing like this, the stitches won't hold. Eli, either calm him or get out of my way." But the man's fevered gaze never left Eli. "They'll guard me while I sleep. Guard me from others, from myself, from the end that waits. By morning, they'll surround me. And nothing, not you, not your town, not even death will move them until their vow is fulfilled." Eli had no answer. He pried the man's fingers from his wrist, laying him back against the table. The stranger finally surrendered to unconsciousness, his chest rising shallowly, his bandaged side seeping fresh red. Outside, the silence was breaking. Horses stamped against the hard-packed earth. Somewhere, a drum began to beat slow, measured, like a heartbeat rolling through the ground. The sound made every hair on Eli's neck stand on end. The townsfolk were whispering now, gathering in clumps in the street. Eli stepped out into the cool night, his eyes scanning the crowd. Faces pale, hands clutching lanterns, rifles half raised. Sheriff Dunning had finally emerged, buckling his gun belt with trembling fingers. He looked at Eli as though he carried the plague. "What in God's name did you drag into my town?" the sheriff demanded. Eli kept his voice steady. "A man who needed saving." "Saving?" Dunning spat, pointing toward the ridgeline where the warriors watched with painted faces. "That's not saving, that's suicide." You brought their wrath down on every man, woman, and child here. They haven't fired a shot, Eli replied. Yet, the sheriff snapped. You think they came here for a handshake? You think 400 riders circle a town at night just to watch the stars? They're waiting for what? I don't know. But when the time comes, blood will pay for it. Eli didn't answer. He felt the truth of the sheriff's words, but he also felt something deeper, heavier in his bones. The wounded man had not lied. These riders were not here to slaughter, not yet. They were here to guard, to keep vigil over something greater than Ash Hollow. The drumbeat quickened, rolling through the night like thunder over distant plains. The warriors raised their torches then, hundreds of flames sparking against the darkness. It was not a threat. It was a ritual. One rider broke from the line, advancing slowly into the town. A woman, tall and proud, with braids that gleamed in the firelight. She carried no rifle, no bow, only a staff carved with markings Eli couldn't understand. The townsfolk shrank back as she rode past, her horse's hooves striking sparks on the hard earth. She stopped before the doctor's shack, her eyes lifting to meet Eli's. "Cowboy," she said, her voice low but carrying. "You carry what should have been left to the spirits. You brought him here, and now you share in his oath. Step aside, and no harm will fall upon you. Stand in our way, and you will share his fate." Eli didn't move. "He was dying," he said. "I couldn't leave him in the dust." Her gaze was steady, unblinking. "Compassion binds deeper than blood. You chose him, and now you are chosen." The meaning sat like a stone in Eli's chest. Around them, the torches flared brighter. The riders began to chant, their voices weaving into the rhythm of the drum. It wasn't a war cry, it was a song, heavy with sorrow and reverence, a sound that made even the sheriff fall silent. The woman dismounted, her boots crunching softly on the dirt. She stepped closer to Eli until he could see the silver rings in her braids, the scars etched into her hands. She glanced past him, into the shack, where the wounded man lay unconscious. "He betrayed the oath," she said. "He spilled blood that was bound never to be spilled. His punishment is to live, not die, until the spirits themselves call him back. We guard him through the night, so no man, no bullet, no accident takes him before his time. That is the vow of 400. And you," her eyes pierced him, "by carrying him, by giving him your strength, you are part of that vow." Eli felt the townsfolk's stares burning into his back. They wanted him to refuse, to hand the man over, to end this night before it consumed them. But when he opened his mouth, only one truth came out. "Then I'll guard him too." The woman's expression did not change, but something flickered in her eyes, recognition, perhaps, or pity. She turned back to her horse, mounting with fluid grace. "By morning," she said, "the circle will be sealed. 400 will guard his sleep. And when the sun rises, the choice will be yours. Stay bound to him or walk away and never speak of this again." The riders' chant swelled. The flames cast shadows across the town, flickering against the wood, the windows, the faces of the fearful. Eli stood in the center of it, feeling the weight of the vow settle onto his shoulders like a mantle he had not asked for but could not cast off. The night stretched on. The wounded man slept, his breath shallow, guarded not just by stitches and bandages, but by an army that moved only with the wind. Eli stayed by the doorway, revolver at his side, heart steady in the rhythm of the drum. And as the hours crawled by, he began to realize the truth. This wasn't just about a wounded stranger. This was about destiny, about choices made long before he entered the desert trail. And when dawn came, nothing, not the town, not the warriors, not even Eli himself would ever be the same. The hours between midnight and dawn were the longest Eli Morgan had ever lived. The riders never moved, never broke their circle, yet their presence weighed heavier with each passing moment. The chanting rose and fell like waves, a rhythm that burrowed into the marrow of the town itself. Even the coyotes dared not howl, even the wind seemed afraid to stir. Inside the shack, the wounded man clung to life, drifting in and out of fevered dreams. He muttered fragments, names Eli didn't know, vows half-spoken, pleas that ended in silence. Dr. Hawthorne dozed in his chair, worn out from the fight against blood and death. But Eli stayed upright, a sentinel in the doorway. Every now and then, the sheriff appeared in the street, his badge glinting weakly in lantern light. His hand twitched near his gun, but he never drew. He knew what Eli knew. 400 rifles would drop him dead before his iron-cleared leather. The townsfolk had retreated into their homes, doors barred, windows shuttered. The town itself seemed to hold its breath. At last, the horizon paled, the first suggestion of dawn brushing the edge of the desert. The chanting changed. The drum quickened. Torches flared brighter, then were extinguished all at once, as though a great wind had passed over them. In the new silence, the woman with the braids rode forward again. Her voice carried like a bell. The night is ended. The vow holds. 400 riders guard the oath-breaker's sleep. Now comes the choice. Eli stepped into the street, the dawn's chill clinging to his breath. He felt the weight of every eyed townsfolk hidden in their homes, the sheriff standing stiff in the dust, the riders lined like statues of fire and stone. He had carried the man here. He had sat vigil through the night. Now his answer would shape not only his own fate, but the town's as well. He turned to the shack. The wounded man stirred, eyes opening weakly. For the first time since Eli found him, clarity shone through the fever. "My name," he whispered, "is Jonah Red Elk." The name struck like thunder. Eli had heard it before, whispered in saloons, muttered around campfires. Jonah Red Elk, the warrior who had once united tribes from across the plains, who had sworn an unbreakable oath of peace among them, and who had then shattered it in blood. The man whose betrayal had sparked feuds and vengeance that burned for years. "You're a legend," Eli said, his voice low. Jonah laughed bitterly, the sound cracking into a cough. "A legend of shame. I killed a man I had sworn never to raise hand against. I broke the bond that bound us to each other, to the spirits, to the land itself. For that crime, I am cursed to live, not die, and those I betrayed, they must guard me, keep me from harm, until the spirits themselves demand my life. That is the vow you now share, cowboy." Eli looked back at the warriors. The truth was carved into their silence. They were not captors, they were guardians. Bound not by hate, but by oath. Jonah's life was a prison, and their watch was the key that could never be turned. The woman dismounted once more, standing before Eli with the dawn rising behind her. "You see now who he is. You see why we guard him. He cannot die until the spirits call. By carrying him, you join that circle. Will you stay, bound by our oath, or will you walk away and let us finish the vigil alone?" The sheriff shouted from the far end of the street, his voice hoarse. "Don't do it, Morgan! Leave him to them! He's not your burden!" Eli's hand curled at his side. He thought of the night the ride through dust and blood, the fevered grip on his wrist, the way Jonah's eyes burned even as death closed in. He thought of the silence of the riders, 400 strong, holding vigil through the long dark without once breaking their circle. He thought of the townsfolk, cowering, praying the storm would pass. And he thought of himself a man who had always walked alone, who had drawn his gun for coin or justice, but never for something greater than his own survival. At last, Eli spoke. His voice was steady. "I carried him when he couldn't walk. I won't drop him now." The woman's gaze held his for a long moment. Then she inclined her head, a gesture of solemn respect. She turned to the riders, raising her staff. A shout rolled from the circle, not of anger, but of affirmation. 400 voices lifted to the sky as the sun broke fully over the horizon, casting fire across the plains. The riders shifted, tightening their formation. They were no longer shadows in the night. They were guardians in the light of day, their oath renewed. Jonah closed his eyes, a single tear carving a path through the grime on his face. "Then you are bound, Eli Morgan. Until the spirits call me, you will share my fate." Eli didn't answer. He didn't need to. The vow was already sealed. The town of Ash Hollow would never forget that dawn. 400 warriors ringed its borders, not with weapons raised in conquest, but with heads bowed in solemn duty. And in the center of it all stood a cowboy and a cursed man, tied together by blood, choice, and the weight of an oath older than the town itself. By morning, Eli had not just saved a life, he had stepped into a story far larger than his own. A story of betrayal and redemption, of oaths unbroken and unbreakable. A story that would be told in whispers for generations. And as the sun climbed higher, burning away the shadows of the night, Eli Morgan understood one final truth. Sometimes the heaviest burdens are not the ones we choose, but the ones we cannot walk away from. If this story gripped you, if you felt the cold wind of the desert, the weight of the vow, and the fire of dawn breaking over Ash Hollow, then don't let it fade here. Share it, carry it forward, just as Eli carried Jonah. Because stories like these remind us that courage isn't always about drawing a gun. It's about standing firm when the world demands you walk away. So subscribe for more tales of power, shame, and sacrifice. And remember, the past is never just history. It's a shadow that rides with us, waiting for the moment we decide whether to honor it or betray it.